Okay, so I don't want to talk about the right or wrong about Nos being brought down. I think we both agree that Blizzard had their right to do it, and I actually just read up about it, Lee. No, they made a statement saying that they didn't make any money off of it. They refused donations most of the time, and the only donations you could make were to the server itself, so that you could keep the server up. But they didn't actually make any profit at all. Blizzard only exercised their right to take it down because it is copywritten material. Specifically, the code is copywritten, and they did use Blizzard's code. So that's why NOS was taken down. What I want to ask you is, what do you think? Do you think players actually want vanilla legacy servers?
Um, I mean, yes and no, right? The servers give you that nostalgia feel. The glory days, as people like to call them, back in the day, this and that. Is it right for them to exist? I don't think so, because it takes away from the game. The
Okay.
game was that, but it's this now.
I think a lot of it has to do with, like, if you think about, like, the N64 games, or even console games in general, when you plug in your old console and you plug in that game is exactly as it was when it first came out. But we're dealing with different types of monsters now. We're dealing with games that get patches. We're dealing with games that get expansions. And we're dealing with this, that, and the other. So, I think the biggest issue is that WoW is kind of singled out in this to a degree, where when they make an expansion for the game, originally BC and Wrath, they changed things about the game, but if you didn't have BC, when you plugged in and you played vanilla, that vanilla was the same. The talent system was there. You could see the stuff for the expansion, the new talents, and you can see some of the other things that were added in, but you were still playing vanilla, you know?
Mhm.
At most, all they did was maybe make the experience a little better. It was in Cataclysm, or more so the end of Wrath, that they changed the systems. So now when you plug in that game, it's not vanilla anymore. It's Cataclysm, but you're capped at 60, or you're capped at 70, or you're capped at 80. So I think that's what people are missing. The fact that they can't plug and play that old game that they loved.
Mhm.
And now that when they play Warlords, if you had your original World of Warcraft CD, the one that installed version 1 of the game, you plug it in, instantly you'd be brought to a patch, which would install the BattleNet, which would install all the new stuff, and now you're playing the Warlords Vanilla, which has its new talents, which has its new systems, which has all of the new things, but you're capped at 60.
Yes.
So, what I want to talk about quickly with you, I'll ask you first. What do you think it is about vanilla that you like the most? Name like 4 things about vanilla that you can say without a doubt those are your favorite things about playing the game.
I like the hybrid talent system where you were free to choose what spells or talents, I guess, you wanted to create your character around. I liked the what do you call it? The dungeon feel. You go into a dungeon today, for example, the average dungeon takes 10 to 15 minutes. Versus back then, when a dungeon took anywhere between 30 to an hour, depending on the dungeon, sometimes longer. And, when you completed a dungeon then, you felt accomplished, versus today, where, okay, dungeon's done, let's do another. And you just kept grinding out the dungeon. So the journey through the dungeon, what is now, at least in my opinion, very lackluster. You don't really feel like you're understanding the story of the dungeon. Like, why are we in Dead Mines? Why are we in Ragefire Chasm? Why are we in Scarlet Monastery? What's really going on? I remember my fondest memory of dungeon was going into Skolemans, I believe it was, or yeah, Scholomance or Stratham. I can't remember which one had the Balthazar. I think at the end, the Dreadlord.
That would have been
Stratham.
Stratham.
Okay.
I think that's Live Strat.
Yeah, I believe it was the human side. And you get there and you're fighting all these Scarlet Crusaders. And you go through and you finally get to the commander who turns out to be a Dreadlord who's of the demons. And there's a huge story in there. And
Yeah,
that
for
was
sure.
really cool and captivating. You don't really get
And it's
that
like
now.
it's like on that note, yeah, on that note, it's like I get it. Like the game was limited in how it told you the story because a lot of the narratives were told in like subtle quests here and there that you may not have done. So yeah, like I appreciate how, especially it kind of started in I would say Lich King, where you're really starting to get scripted events and stories and things that really start giving you a narrative. I appreciate that. I really do. But you're right. Like there was the thing about dungeons back then was that they took time, and it wasn't as simple as dungeon hopping. Like when you went to do a dungeon, you knew you were investing at the very least an hour doing that, even on good days, just to get to the end of the dungeon. And most of the time, people would do it just because they wanted to, not because they needed.
I remember there were times where I would set up times with friends or guildmates, especially in the Burning Crusade, where, hey, I need to get my Karazhan attunement. I'm going to need some help getting it done. We need to do this, 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 and this. And you had to do, right. I think it was 3 to do Botanica, Arcatraz, and Mechanar to get the keys. And then you had to go on this long chain quest for Karazhan. And that's just to get into a frickin' raid. The first raid. You don't...
It wasn't. I don't think it was Arcatraz. It was Shadow Lapse.
Whichever it was. The point being that you had to go on this journey to experience the story, to understand what you're doing in order to get to the end point, and that has really been taken away from the game. So for people who want that sense of fulfillment and quest. They really are drawn to these vanilla servers, these BC servers, because that's what they love. Excuse me. And that's what they want to feel again. And I think that it's kind of unfair to the players for Blizzard to not recognize that and to kind of take that away from them. So that's why they cling on to the past.
Okay. So the real question is like, I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. I think that the game back then had a different sense of adventure. There was a lot more exploration because you had to run around, you had to do things. You would do things more with players in the world because there wasn't a queuing system, so you would actually have to actively get groups. And more so, you talk about the raid attunement. I think that the legendary quest kind of replaces the raid attunement in the sense that the raid attunement, the whole reason it really existed was to force you to go into that raid to complete it. Not just be in it, you had to complete it. The legendary quest requires the same thing. I think the biggest issue with legendary quest is that it can be done in LFR.
Yes.
I think that there are points of it that should be done in LFR. I think that the grinding part of it, where you had to get like shards and things, sure, let that be done in LFR. But just like how you have to get normal or heroic Archimond to get that mount, or is it only heroic Archimond?
Heroic and mythic.
Heroic and mythic. So just like how you have to get that mount, the moose, in heroic Archimond, I think that the legendary quest should require you have to do at least normal, the final boss on normal, in order to get the legendary piece.
I think,
which isn't asking much.
No,
That's
I
not asking
agree.
a lot.
I think the rating and atmosphere amongst any raider, whether you're casual, intermediate, or hardcore player, would be much more lively and better, and there wouldn't be such hostility and negativity in the world. Right. There's a lot of times where you go into LFR and you see these top tier raiders in LFR to get their quest done because it's easier on them. They don't want to they know that, hey, if I want this item, which is gonna increase my DPS, and it's for the benefit of my guild, I'm going to put the time in the least frustrating area I can. Right. And they're going to abuse that.
So the thing is that we spoke about the reasons why people want vanilla WoW. I want to talk about the things that people don't want and people forget. People forget Questing back in vanilla and even in BC was hugely disjointed. You had to run all over the world, and it wasn't fun, especially when you weren't the classes that had early access to speed increases. If you're a warrior, you were running from the top of the world, especially if you're an undead. You're running from Undercity, and you're going all the way down the map, right? And it took a long time.
So,
and even though you had flight points, it still took a long time. So there's that. The other thing people forget, the world was spaced out in such a way that depending on your faction, getting to certain zones was a nightmare. People forget that while the Horde had free reign in Tearsful Glades to get to Scarlet Monastery, the Alliance had to go through a level 50 Western Plaguelands zone, then go into Horde territory, and if you're on a PvP server, you're gonna get ganked, and then they had to go to Scarlet Monastery. And if you were anybody, I remember the day that they first introduced the Halloween event. I can't tell you how many freaking skeletons were littered all over Scarlet Monastery.
It wasn't a monastery; it was a graveyard.
It was insane because it was in Horde territory. We were on a PvP server, and they picked the wrong faction. Yep. And you had to walk there. It wasn't a queue. You had to walk there. If you wanted to do that event, you had to be there.
Back then, there wasn't flying mounts that you could just mount up and fly away or fly into the dungeon. There was none of that. Well.
And I don't personally have a problem with flying mounts. I think flying is fine. I think that the issue with flying is that you get to... Okay, so for example, Cataclysm was a flying expansion. Cataclysm was designed with flying in mind. They designed it so that they knew you would be able to fly, so they were able to put things higher up, they were able to put things here, there. So it didn't feel out of place. And because of that, the zones were actually larger. If you took the scale of the zones, they are actually considerably larger than the zones we have here in Warlords, because they had to take flying into account. The problem is, Warlords is not a flying expansion. Warlords is a ground expansion. They expect you, much like a lot of BC, to not be able to fly. And when you can fly, the world feels minuscule.
Yep. I think it's really sad that Blizzard caved on that, and I kind of wish they didn't, because it's as you said, it takes away from it. I remember, leveling from 90 to 100, and
that was the one thing this expansion did right. Leveling
was
perfect.
The leveling was
really
great. Like if you were to take away anything
from
this expansion, it's that Blizzard finally got the leveling down, which makes it even better for when Legion comes out.
Right. So the point I want to make is that we spoke about the good things about vanilla. It was the exploration, the questing, the playing with people, the MMO, basically the things you'd expect from an MMO. What made it bad, what sucked about vanilla basically was that it took forever to get around the world, like forever. Quests were hugely disjointed. You would go across zones to turn in one quest, then have to run all the way back. Getting to dungeons took forever, and a lot of times was a hazard for your health. So because of those reasons, I think Blizzard's right in that people say they want legacy servers, but I don't think they do. I think that they miss the fun stuff about vanilla, but they forget all the bad stuff. And they forget how frustrating vanilla was. And they forget how frustrating Burning Crusade was. And how frustrating things... Because all the frustrations they have now of how long it takes to do this, that, and the other. People are complaining about how long it takes to get the Legendary Ring. Imagine they had to go back and get attuned for Naxxramas. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good luck.
You had to rep farm, you had to get materials, you had to do X, Y, Z. You needed rep. And I think it
took forever.
Needed, if I'm correct.
It was insane. It took a very long time, and that was just to step foot in the final raid. These days, you can step foot in the final raid whenever you want. The only caveat is that if you want to get the legendary, you have to start with the first raid. You have to do stuff in there. I think they stretched it out a bit too much. I think there's a bit too much random stuff, but they tried. But this has me go to the next point. So I don't think people want vanilla servers. I think that Blizzard's right. What I think Blizzard's wrong about is that I think that with World of Warcraft, they're turning it too much into a single-player game. I think that there's the LFR is pretty much single-player. I think that the aspect of playing with your friends is basically dead. Because, I don't know about you, Lee, but when I joined the game, I joined it to play with my friends. Nowadays, I play it because I'm more focused on progression, and
I don't think
I
I
play with
don't
my
think
friends
all of
sometimes.
your
But
original friends are playing. I think it's only a couple that play. But in my case, I started
no, the
I
joke
started
is
playing
that yeah,
because I saw you playing, and I was like really captivated. We had some issues with your account. We were playing together, but then when I started on my own. I didn't play with you. I didn't really do anything. I kind of started on my own, but then I made friends in the game. Now I look at my BattleNet, like my friends list, and it's this guy's playing on this server, this guy's playing on that server. He's Horde, he's Alliance, blah blah blah. Everything
yeah.
is so disjointed and scattered that I start to think like, what happened to all these people that I met? Oh, they stopped playing the game. I have people on my BattleNet that haven't logged in 2-3 years.
That's right. Anyway, so the thing is about WoW today with Warlords. The biggest gripe I have with Warlords is that in Mists, to a degree, you would find people in the world. You'd go around. There was actually, I remember in Mist actually flying around the world and wanting to find rare spawns and wanting to do secrets and this, that, and the other. I don't get that in Warlords, because what they did was they took those secrets and they toned them way down. It's no longer like you see a rare spawn. Like in Mists, you found a rare spawn. That rare spawn, even though the gear he probably drops is garbage, he could drop tokens, which are bind on account, which increase your reputation with specific factions, and those reputations give you access to mounts, patterns, and all sorts of things. In Warlords, not only do the reputations give you nothing, they really give you nothing. You kill a rare spawn, it gives you a level 92, it might be epic item. And that's great for leveling, but we're max level now.
Yeah.
None of that matters anymore. And even the max level stuff drops items that are so stupidly weak that it's not worth the effort.
I think
Like,
it's
I
really
don't even kill.
interesting because rep farming back in the day, you did it because you wanted something. I have all the reps.
And it's stupid because
yeah,
they got it right.
yeah,
They got it
they did.
perfect. They made it so that you did reps, you unlock new rep quests, and they're not always the same. They made it so that in Mists, like I was doing I forget what it was called, the one that gets you the Griffin mount, like the shield, overshield or whatever. Those quests were different every day. So you did them multiple times, sure, but you didn't do them in a row. And as you unlocked different tiers of reputation, from honored to revered, you unlocked more quests, you unlocked more things to do. So the repetition
was warranted.
Was warranted because you now unlock more things to do. They took that away, and I don't get it.
6.1.
It doesn't make sense. They took the good part
6.1 was
away.
the point in the expansion before Blackrock Foundry came out that the game was in a state that it could have been the best expansion ever. And unfortunately, I don't know why, they went to 6.2 and Blackrock Foundry came out. What was the biggest problem with Blackrock Foundry? There was no there was no lead up to it. It's Blackrock Foundry.
None.
It would have made more
And
sense
another
to
thing
have
they changed.
Grimrail Depot as the starter dungeon for Blackrock Foundry. You're stopping the supply train from going there. It would have made sense to have a daily hub there. It would have made sense to have story quests in the area that lead up to Blackrock Foundry. But there isn't. There's none of it.
That's another thing they did wrong. In Wrath, they had it perfect. In BC, they implemented a couple new dungeons as they went. But Wrath had it perfect. Every time a new tier came out, a new dungeon came out with it. I think except for Ulduar. So, no, not everything. So, but they had the Trial of the Champion, which was a great catch-up dungeon. It got you into Ulduar quality gear, at least for normal. Then they had the Forge of Souls, Pit of Saran, and Halls of Reflection that came out with Lich King, and they told you the story of Icecrown Citadel, right? And they also gave you catch-up gear. Cataclysm had it freaking nailed. Every time a new thing came out, even though they were rehashes, there was a new dungeon for you to do that gave you catch-up. And then the final one, the part of the expansion that had the least story built up to it, which was Deathwing's Raid,
3 dungeons,
had 3 dungeons, each of which told you the story in 3 different perspectives. What happened way back when, what's going to happen in the future if we fail, and what is happening now. and that was great. So you had all those, and then in Mists they did none of it. They had no dungeons added. Your only build into Throne of Thunder or into Siege of Orgrimmar were through the scenarios.
And believe it or not, the scenarios were
cool.
actually a hit. People did like them, but only after you did it once. You know, like you did it once, you got the story. It would have been done.
Right. So the problem they had in Mists was that they changed the dungeons and they turned them into scenarios, and then they misread what people were saying when they're like, we don't like scenarios. What they were really saying is, we like dungeons. And then they go into this expansion, and what do? They take away scenarios, but they don't bring back dungeons. They think that mythic dungeons are enough to keep everybody entertained.
I think mythic dungeons and challenge mode dungeons, as much as people like challenge modes, I think they're freaking retarded. Like, I would have much rather them spend their time making newer content, newer dungeons, maybe even a third tier of rating. You know, something that is better.
They have the art kits. They have the ability. What they've done is they've turned it. We called it World of Diablo in the last video we made. That's what they're turning it into, where they can put out one area and let it be rehashed over and over and over again because they think players don't care, and the problem is they do. And I think they're seeing the repercussions of that now. And in Legion, it looks like they're not changing anything. I think there's good stuff in Legion, but I think that Legion might actually be it. I think that Legion, if I had to make a prediction, I think that we'll see a couple million people come back for Legion because they're curious. But I think that they're going to drop down to 3 million players somewhere in that area, and I think that it's going to be the same thing as Warlords, where they put out a patch that's really, really lackluster content, and it's going to drop even further. And I think once you get to the point where another MMO has more subscribers and more active players than WoW, that is your clear sign that WoW is dead. That is your sign that people really would rather play something else. Because a lot of people playing Final Fantasy, a lot of people playing Guild Wars, and a lot of people playing all these other games that have huge subs, they are World of Warcraft players. At least half of them. They came from Wrath and from Cataclysm. They came from Vanilla and BC. They came from Warlords. They came from this game, which they consider to be a shadow of what it used to be, and they went to a game that they think is doing it right.
If Blizzard wants Legion to be successful, they have to do a couple things. Number one, they have to get the questing spot on. Number two, they need to not make the same mistakes they made in WoD. Number one, if you're going to have flying in the game, at any point, make the world so. You cannot design a world based on ground mounts, and then when all the babies and casual people or whoever start tearing up because their precious flying is taken away, and then you go, you know what, I'm sorry, son, here, have it, and then you screw the world.
I think this is an opportunity.
It's a huge mistake. So
I think it's an opportunity for them to design the world with flying in mind, but they can do it clever. They can make it so that you can't access a lot of areas. Because in BC, every zone had at least one area that without flying you could not reach. There was no pathway to it. There was no ladder. There was no elevator, nothing. It was an area that only after you bought flying you could access. I think that's what they should do. I think that they should... Case in point here,
Tempest Keep. The summoning stone was nowhere near the entrance. The only way in was to fly there.
Without flying, you couldn't get there. You couldn't even summon because warlocks were very literally unable to summon in that area. Yep. That was a thing they put in specifically. They made it so that if you wanted access to the end game, you needed to have flying. Back then, flying was an investment. These days, flying should be a reward. Congratulations, you hit max level. You now have earned flying. You know?
Anyway.
That's what it should be, and then by adding flying,
another point that I think Blizzard needs to do to make sure Legion is successful and that WoW can continue healthily is they need to implement some sort of daily quest hub and dungeons. They need to keep it current with the the current raid tier. They need to keep it
Yeah.
going. They can't just go, oh well, we're gonna put challenge mode dungeons or challenge modes and mythic dungeons, because that's not enough. You can
That's
only
right.
do the same
Because-
content so much before you as a player go, this is really boring. I remember every patch.
That's right. And before people chime in and are like, but dailies are the same content over and over again. The difference is that I don't think people got tired of dailies in Wrath and tired of dailies. Sorry, in Cataclysm. They got worn out of dailies in Mist because they were just the sheer
There was
abundance of them.
way too, yeah.
I think
there was
that
like
having
9 new reps.
Right.
Yeah.
It was insane. And they kept adding more and more and more. I think that having one consolidated small area that is story-wise linked to the current content, that has daily quests that offer rewards such as mounts and toys and gear in some cases, having that added in at a per patch basis is something good. Because if you're doing it while it's current, you get it done, you don't have to do it again. If you're doing it, if you come into the game as a new player, you're like, I just hit max level, this is the current raid, what can I do? Oh look, there's a daily hub here, and oh look, there's also a daily hub over there for the previous content that I can do to get those rewards. It's a good way to encourage people to.
And the last thing that Blizzard needs to do, in my honest opinion, people may disagree, but I think if Blizzard wants their game to be successful, they need to stop LFR. They need to abolish it, get rid of it, or at the very least,
LFR should be consolidated.
Not have it reward gear comparable to that of a previous tier. It should be, your LFR gear should never be better than a previous tier's gear. As well, you should not even get legendary rewards from LFR. Have people make an effort to raid.
LFR is the thing that replaced dungeons, added in every tier as catch-up mechanics. It should be the other way around. LFR should be removed, and even if it's just one dungeon, a new dungeon should be put in place that links to the story of that area, maybe even uses the same environments, but it gives you catch-up gear and also more in-depth ideas of what's happening in those areas. But yeah, so those are the things. So to summarize everything, I don't think people want legacy servers. I don't think you.
Yeah, I agree.
I think you agree with me on this.
It's a nice idea, but
I think it sucks that the private server was taken down, but it's within their rights. They have the licensing. They own the game. It's theirs. I think that the things that people miss about vanilla are its exploration and its player base and like playing with people. I think the things that people forget is that it took forever to get around the world, and that it was a grindy experience, and you got killed a lot, especially on PvP servers, getting to dungeons and the zoning and the way that things worked. It wasn't laid out very well. I think that the direction of WoW right now is worrisome because it's very single player focused, and I think that what they have to really focus on if they don't want their game to die is they need to make it so that Legion has enough of a reason for you to go out in the world. They seem to be doing that, but we'll see. They need daily hubs, they need new dungeons, they need new things for you to want to do in order for you to stay engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, well,
yeah.
Thanks for the talk. All right. I know you got to go, so thanks to everybody who listened. If you have any comments and whatever your thoughts may be on whether or not there should be legacy servers, how you think Warlords is, and how you think Legion will be, or anything of what we discussed or what we didn't discuss, leave your comments in the section below, and thanks for watching.